Alrighty, folks. The conversation for today is going to be these Delta Javelin 4.5-30x56 rifle scope. I've had this scope for quite a long time, so I've had plenty of opportunities to take a very, very careful look. I kept on waiting for a right comparison field. I like to compare scopes that are broadly similar to each other, and it just was never quite there. The stuff I was looking at would be either too expensive or not expensive enough or configured very differently. And somehow, like, I've talked about the scope, I never released a full review. And I think I should, because it is a nice scope and I think it should get more publicity than it currently has. So 4.5-30x56, that's about 15 inches long. I want to say it's 36 ounces in weight, so relatively light for the configuration. It is the classic category that we can safely call a high-end Chinese scope. To me, optically, it looks eerily similar to the Athlon Ares ETR, also 4.5-30x56, so it's probably related. My best guess, it is more or less the same OEM. As far as Chinese-made precision goes, we're probably the best one I've seen yet, or at least it's basically in the running between that and Athlon, and whichever one you like more. Two good again, both have good reticles. I've looked at next to me Optica 6. The Javelin's a little bit better. I've looked at it next to some of the less expensive Chinese scopes. Honestly, the reason I pulled it out is that I'm also looking at the DNT, the one, which is right here. And I needed something to figure out where the DNT fits. DNT is a very nice scope. It's not quite as nice as Javelin, though a lot of the difference you see is really on high magnifications. If I were looking at negatives in this scope, honestly, there isn't a ton. It tracks, tracking is accurate and spot on. I am training for an Earl Hunter match, so I'm spending a lot of time with it, spinning the turrets. It always comes back to where it needs to. The scope is packaged to it's relatively trim. The reticle in this one is the SMR-1 reticle. I did not design it, although there are some features in it that look like my stuff. I didn't design it. There is some guy from Sweden that did this reticle for them. I think Scandinavian stands for Scandinavian match. SMR stands for Scandinavian match reticle or something like that. There are a couple of things about the reticle I'm not crazy on. If you look at the picture, you notice that there are the lines, the numbers that are in the tree, just to the right, about a milliradian away from the tree. Personally, I don't like to have the numbers so close to this central line, but again, opinions vary. And another thing I'm not a huge fan of, it has a bunch of the 0.1 milliradian spaced hash marks below the center and to the right. Aside from the fact that I don't need so many 0.1s, I'm not sure what to use them for. I also you just need a couple of 0.1s for engine, right? So I also don't like the asymmetry. It makes the left-right not symmetric. That's the same part of my problem with the numbers as well. I prefer the numbers to be on the two sides of the tree rather than on the center. By the vertical, and what's for me it's a little bit more distracting is that they are kind of skewed on the side. Is the big problem? No, it's actually a very minor thing, and the way I shoot, it doesn't really get in my way too much. But if you get yourself in a situation where you are holding over the tree and you have just exactly 1 milliradian, 1.2 milliradian of wind coming crosswise from the left, the number is going to get in the way. But it's not the most common situation, Aside from it, the reticle works nicely for me. Thicknesses are done very, very well. I don't genuinely like the reticles that are ultra, ultra thin. This one is not bad at all. The center aiming dot, so there's a floating dot. That's 0.05 milliradian, then there is 0.2 space and 0.2 long hash marks. So it's an arrangement I like, that I use all the time, and I'm very comfortable holding with that. The way I shoot predominantly these days is that I will generally dial and hold for wind if I'm really in a time crunch for transitioning between targets. Sometimes I'll use additional reticle holdover, but I don't use that much of the tree. So the tree in this one goes down to about 10 milliradian, which is perfectly normal. I like the fact that it's not an enormous tree like some of the other designs out there do. I very seldom use more than maybe 3 mils of holdover, something like that. On the windage side, the thick bars come to about 6 or so milliradian away from center. I like that. If I ever have to hold more than 6 milliradian of wind, there's a good chance I'm going to dial wind too. So there's that. The turrets are a little bit tall. They are well marked. The way the knurling is done is interesting. There is a knurling all the way at the top, and there is a little bit of a knurling here halfway through. So holding is very convenient. Nothing. Knurling is relatively subtle, but it's very easy to hold on to. The turret's lock. It's a pop-up lock. They go up and down with a nice audible click. You're not going to accidentally lock it. There are nice detents over there. It's a chart that goes up and down. And on the bottom over there, there is a scale that tells you how many revolutions you have dialed. You do need tools to reset the turrets and set the zero stop. Elevation turret has a zero stop. But that's relatively common. Nothing to it. The windage turret also locks and it's also nicely marked. The hashes are all slightly different lengths, so it's pretty easy to figure out which hash mark you're on. And it's nicely, reasonably bright white, so I haven't really had too many issues with that. As I said, tracking for everything that I've checked has been very good. Total elevation adjustment range is about 30 milliradian. I've tested tracking. There is less than 1% error as you get close to the edges. I don't think I've ever used more than 12 milliradian when shooting with this thing, so no issues whatsoever. iBox is pretty good. The scope is relatively easy to get behind. It tightens up at high magnification. There is no way to work around the laws of physics. That's kind of the fortunate or unfortunate truth. But it works and it works well. Depth of field is decent. It's not as good as in a later generation of light optics work scopes, etc. So I have to adjust the parallax a little bit more than I do, for example, with the Razor Gen 3 or something like that, but not a lot more. So once I'm out to past about 300, 400 yards, I really don't need to touch the side focus very much, so I can transition between targets relatively quickly and without any issues. There are, I think, 6 illumination levels with the offsettings in between. Is it 6? It is 6. They are fairly widely spaced and it's not super bright. The illumination is really designed for low light and it works exceptionally well in low light. The only part of the reticle that's illuminated is the center dot and those 4 splash marks around it that make for a very tiny little cross. So if I were to set up a longish range hunting rig, this reticle would actually work very, very nicely between the thick outer bars and the small illuminated cross. It works surprisingly well on low power. Now in bright light, the center lines do get fairly thin. So, but for shits and giggles, I do some practice shooting unsupported in offhand with my precision rifle, which is a questionable practice. But for that, I dial magnification all the way down, and I have not had any issues aiming with it, admittedly, in decent light. And if the light is fading, then the illumination is your friend. It's not bright enough for a day like this, but it's easily bright enough once the conditions get worse. In terms of the mechanical feel, it is as good as I've seen from any Chinese scope. Everything is smooth, everything turns well. There is a small cattail that comes with the scope. I've used it in fairly low temperatures, nothing stiffened up unnecessarily. Like everything works. It's just a nicely worked out and optimized design. For the money, it's probably one of the better ones out there. Now, again, it is made in China, so you have to be okay with that. But barring that, it's kind of an interesting thing. In terms of bang for the buck, this is way up there. I think NX Defense at Canvas, if you guys sell them, NX Defense has them for just over 1,049, something like that, which is a very good price for something that gives you this quality. One of the things I like, and again, I'm not real big on accessories, but this particular scope comes with metal flip-up caps that have enough friction. They stay where you want them and lie flat, don't obscure your view, lock nicely once you're closed, and you can position them going up or going sideways. For example, because I run the diving board, my objective cap, I position it to go sideways. They probably don't seal from dust and dirt as well as, thicker, bigger caps that slip over the objective. But honestly, I've been out in all sorts of weather with this thing without any issues. Had it in a couple of different mounts. This particular one is from Area 419. It's a 34mm tube, so any 34mm mount will work. I know there are some problem mounts out there and others where with some scopes, you can pinch the tube and start having issues with adjustments or the side focus. I've had this in a bunch of different mounts and some that I know occasionally cause problems. This Riflescope design appears to be very tolerant of these slightly out of spec mounts. I have not had anything slow this scope down at all in any way, shape, or form. In terms of optical limitations, there isn't a ton. It's not as nice as a super fancy scope. Normally what I have on this rifle is a 5-25 tangent, and this is not as nice. Okay. But it surprised me with how good the image fidelity is. On a very bright day like this, looking way out there, I can find a little bit of chromatic aberration if I'm looking for it, but there is in the center of the image, there is almost none. It's nice, very nicely corrected out. There's a little bit more lateral chromatic aberration toward the edges. And if you dial it and start getting it very, very close to the adjustment range on the side toward which you're adjusting, you will see a little bit of image quality degradation, because again, all scopes do that. You'll see a little bit more chromatic aberration. Beyond that, there is really not much to complain about. One of the bane of many Chinese scopes, of the higher-end ones, is that the image quality really starts degrading in the upper 20-25% of the magnification range. And with this scope, I see very little of that, right? It's remains, maybe there is a little bit, but a lot of that is simply due to the fact that the exit pupil gets smaller, so you just don't see quite as well. But in a bright day like this, it's interesting when I'm shooting with sunglasses, I see a little bit of degradation on high magnification. Why? Because with dark sunglasses, my eye pupil has dilated a little bit. Once I take the glasses off or shoot with clear glasses, interestingly, the image quality of another 30 power is still looking very, very good to me. So a lot of it is just to the basic fact that nobody has been able to overcome the laws of physics and the executable diameter is in practical terms, I do most of my shooting on 12 to 15. It works beautifully there. And I have really seen very little image quality degradation across the board. One of the things that's fairly common with front focal scopes is something called the diopter shift. The reticle focus changes with magnification because the reticle is a diopter system. I didn't do an exact measurement of these things, but I looked at it quite carefully. And in terms of diopter shift, the scope's actually very, very good. Probably one of the better ones I've seen from China. I've seen two Delta Javelins and they both had minimal diopter shift, which I thought was noteworthy. That's pretty much that. It is an excellent scope. Once again, doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. I suggest to take a careful look if you are shopping the $1,000 price range and see if this reticle works for you. Well, as I said, I do find a couple of things about it I don't like. Overall, it has not slowed me down very much. I've been using this scope for quite a long time. It has worked wonderfully for me. If you have any questions, please visit me at my website, www.darklordofoptics.com. Thank you.